Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about my work and the work of my colleagues over the last 20 or 30 years. Let me see if... Right. I'm conscious I have only about 20 minutes to discuss mobile learning, and that actually means I'm doing several things at once, trying to explain it, trying to advocate it maybe, and trying to critique it. And maybe I ought to say fairly early on, before saying what mobile learning is, what mobile learning isn't. And I suppose it's not a brand or a product or a technology or a pedagogy. It's not an organization or a club or a method. Maybe it's best defined as the activities over 20 years of a relatively small number of activists, researchers, and developers, and maybe their ideas, concepts, projects, programs grew out of a time when mobile technology was rare, expensive, fragile, and difficult. And actually, over the last 10 years, mobile technology has become cheap, robust, easy, familiar, and universal. And so, if I was looking for a definition of mobile learning, maybe 20 years ago, it was something to do with mobile technology. And then it became associated with the idea of learning whilst you're moving. And now I think it's more to do with the type of learning for any society or any culture or any organization that is characterized by moving, mobility, and connectedness. So we've seen a change from maybe a very formal institutional idea of learning supported by a mobile technology to an idea of learning that is part of all of our societies outside school and college and university, because those societies are all connected and mobile. Right. So what I can do, maybe to give you an idea of what mobile learning is to talk about some of the achievements and some of the, if you like, classifications of mobile learning, the way we've managed to think about it in order to structure it. And I think one of the things that we've achieved is making learning richer or more engaging. And if you look for the various buzzwords in education, like situated, authentic, contextual, personalized, then mobile learning can tick all of those boxes. And there are examples of all of those different categories. So you could look at field work or field trips where people doing ecology or biology or conservation or geography need to go out into the field to do experimental work. And previously, they would have done that experimental work with paper. They would have worked through a script. It would have been hardwired. Their activities would have been pre-planned. But now with mobile technology, they can actually take measurements, do calculations, and react to the changing environment or react to the experience of that time and that place. And another example of that is actually in a lecture theatre where people can use mobile technology to feed their reactions to the lecturer using personal response systems or using their own mobile devices, but that actually means that the lecturer knows if the lecture is going well, if the students have understood what's being said, can set them a test and find out the answer. And in both of those cases, in the field work and in the lecture theatre, you could say that the learning has become more agile or contingent, related to conditions there and then, not the planned ones, but reality as it evolves. An obvious place where mobile learning has been used extensively is any vocational training. So training to be nurses, vets, teachers, any of a variety of professions that involve a placement or an internship where the students are distributed. So they're distributed to hospitals or doctors' surgeries if they're training in medicine, and being connected back to their university or back to their college means they can keep in touch with their tutor, means they can keep in touch with each other, means they have reference material, means they can collect data, they can take pictures, and basically the learning that they are doing becomes more meaningful and their experiences become more structured because they are taking their learning out of the classroom, out of the university, and out of the artificial environment of the school or the college and into the real environment and trying to understand real contexts. Another example where, in this case, learning is contextual is so many different projects where the technology knows where you are. It is location aware. It knows your trajectory. It knows your history. So it is used in this way in art galleries, museums, botanical gardens, game parks, all sorts of outdoor environments where if a student has a mobile device, it can actually feed them information. It can feed them images, video, that are specific to where they are and specific to where they have been. And so it can make inferences or judgments to help them learn better. It can tell them about a particular painting. It can make a judgment that they're interested in a particular type of painting. It can make suggestions. It can make recommendations. So that's an example of context-aware mobile learning in an informal situation, but it's also been used in a formal situation in universities where these students have mobile devices and they are learning town planning. And it means the information they get from their laptops, tablets, mobiles is specific to their location, specific to what they're doing. And again, it makes their learning experience more meaningful because it's actually situated in the real environment. And then an example of augmented reality. Clearly the road is really there, the building behind is really there, but the car isn't really there. The user is using the mobile phone as a camera viewfinder. The mobile phone, again, knows its location. It is location aware, and so it can insert images, extra images. And again, the educational uses of these are just too many. We've seen this kind of augmented reality used in history and geography and English literature and religious studies, every subject. And this is another example, this time from Berlin, where this is what a student would see through their mobile phone. The Brandenburg Gate is still there, is really there. The building behind that now houses Starbucks is really there, but the Berlin Wall is not really there. But that's what the learner can see. And it's completely authentic. You can walk up to it, you can walk round it, you can move up, you can move down, and it is completely convincing. And again, the educational uses are very, very obvious, and there are so many of them. But what we've noticed in the last 20 years is maybe 20 years ago, we spent 90% of our time making the technology work. And nowadays, this is just shopping. It's just retail. You can buy it, you can download it. And this means that, well, many more people understand the technological potential, and many more people can start to look at the educational possibilities without worrying about the technology. The technology is easy. Everyone's got it, everyone understands it. And this is, if you like, an example of social contextual learning where several people can have a shared experience of something happening, in this case in Amsterdam. So, if you like, those slides were about the capacity of mobile learning to make learning richer by making it more contextual, personalised, situated, authentic, agile, contingent. And the other thing that I think we've achieved is that we can use the technology to take learning to people and communities where conventional educational interventions were difficult or impossible or dangerous or expensive. We can actually extend the reach. We can increase the audience for education. So this is a project in South Africa amongst kids in townships learning maths, where the technology just provides a simple messaging system that links them to a maths tutor. And it's very free, it's very cheap, and it's sustainable, and it is vast. It has tens of thousands of kids involved, and the kids are helped with their mathematics by undergraduates who get credit for it. So it's a kind of magic triangle. The phone company makes money, the kids don't notice they're spending any money, and the undergraduates are getting rewarded for their expertise. And this is also an example in an impoverished area. This is taken in Gaza in the Middle East, where the schools use SMS messaging for keeping in touch with parents. And many of these applications and many of these ideas are quite conventional. So they're not revolutionary in pedagogic terms, but they just extend our reach, the number of people we can reach out to, and do really quite simple or obvious things. So for example, this is a simulation, but it runs on mobile phones, training students to be environmental officers for local government. It sends out a message. The students have to each to react to that message and make a decision. And it's about a dam and a storm and an earthquake and what decisions to make about evacuation or precautionary measures. And it's really, really simple, and it's really, really cheap, but it means that the students can do it anywhere and anytime. And then, of course, there's the capacity to use the mobile phones in situations where there is dead time, where you can learn a little bit of something in a bus queue, in a bus, in an elevator. Sorry, that was Nairobi bus station. But it's not just a case of reaching out to people or communities across a geographical distance, but maybe across a social distance or a cognitive or a physiological distance. So many early projects worked with people who were homeless, not far away, but actually separated by economic barriers from accessing education. And this example shows a man with a visual impairment, and he would have used a very expensive, dedicated technology, dedicated especially for people with that problem. But now people in the deaf community or the visually impaired community can just use apps on mobile phones. Not only is it easier and cheaper, but it's also removing a stigma, or it integrates them more into the mainstream education system. And then there are various, if you like, hotspots where we've made big progress. So one of them might be languages. There are a lot of apps, websites, for vocabulary, for pronunciation, for grammar, in many, 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 many languages. Some of them very, very small languages with only 400 people speaking them, but nevertheless, it's helping to teach the language or preserve the language. And of course, what the mobile phone represents for many people, for most of the people in the world, is the access or the portal to the World Wide Web. So all of the things you could do on a computer, you can now access via a mobile phone. So again, it's not revolutionary. Many of the things we did on computers, we just now do them on mobile phones, including assessment. So if it's appropriate in terms of a vocational skill or a craft skill like physiotherapy or automobile maintenance, we can get students to capture video with a real car or a real person. And again, what we're seeing is a process of taking learning out of the textbook, out of the classroom, out of the institution, into the real environment. And again, this is another very simple example from Mexico of kids doing maths homework. And it is very traditional. They have to do their maths on a piece of paper, but they all have mobile phones. They now have a tripod, and the video of them doing the exercise goes to a teacher, goes to a server, and it means that the teacher can see the process. A very traditional way of teaching maths, show me your workings, show me how you did it, show me what you've done, but just extended to more kids over a bigger area who may have difficulty getting to school. But any of these initiatives fundamentally depend, we now discover, on using the technology that people, children, adults, adolescents, using the technology that they already own, using their own devices. So maybe for 15 or 10 years at the start of the century, we had to provide the technology because no one had it. It was difficult, it was expensive, it was unusual. But now we're beginning to recognize the institutional challenges, the infrastructural challenges, the challenges to equity. And once we've overcome those challenges and started to use the students' own devices, we then have models of mobile learning that are sustainable, that are scalable, and that put increasing agency and control of learning in their hands because it's their systems, it's their devices, it's their connectivity. And in some ways that is potentially quite challenging for teachers. I mean, in universities, we control the hardware and the infrastructure and the desktop computers, and now we're saying the students are going to control their own devices, and so that alters our relationships. Another thing that mobiles have been doing, for example, in universities, is providing guidance and support in what are complex institutions. A university might have 20, 30,000 students, might have several campuses, many different libraries, lots of different rooms, complicated timetables, lots of lecturers. We now see more and more apps being developed that give students support to find their way around these complex institutions. It doesn't necessarily help them learn, it just removes some of the barriers in their daily lives. And I think we've also shown that irrespective of your particular pedagogy or maybe your particular culture about learning, that our ideas and experiences can support any of them. So if you have a model of learning that is particularly around content or information or transmission, then there are lots of different ways of doing that. So this is an ebook program in East Africa. So that's pure transmission, and it scales up, and it's very easy to do. And we've seen a lot of examples of teaching skills and problem solving using games. And we've also seen lots of attempts to port e-learning strategies into mobile computers. Now, mobile phones. Now, maybe this is not appropriate, and maybe this is not innovative, but in some ways we progress by making small incremental changes that don't make us uncomfortable. So if you're happy with the idea of having WebCT on a computer, then having WebCT on a mobile phone is no big deal. It's convenient. It's not revolutionary, it's not transformative, but it's not challenging either, and it's a safe route to progress. Okay, briefly, having talked about the extent to which mobile technology and mobile learning have worked within universities, colleges, and schools, what I don't think we've addressed at all is how do we help our students learn when there is so much content, so many communities out there for them to learn from? How do we make them critical consumers of the abundant resources? So, for example, any of our students could access podcasts about history, language, or anything else. Most of them not produced by publishers or educationalists or universities, but being produced by individuals. So there are questions our students need to answer. Where do I find a resource for learning Arabic? And how do I know if it's any good? But there are also millions, really, millions of apps our students could be using and accessing and learning from. But again, the same questions. Where do I find the right ones? How do I tell if they're any good? Other kinds of resources, video, groups, listservs, just a vast array of stuff our students could be using. But again, how do we know if it's any good? How do we know if it's true? How do I find it? And that illustrates the point in a way that knowledge is now far more fragmented or transient. So this is a picture of London during a bomb attack about 10 years ago. And again, we can see the knowledge of that being generated not by the BBC or not by the Ministry of Information, but by ordinary people with camera phones. So again, we're asking our students to live in a world where people are generating this kind of information, and they could be generating a number of different perspectives and points of view, and we're asking our students maybe to be critical consumers of this kind of information, but actually maybe intelligent producers of it as well, if they are to be enfranchised in societies where the production of information, ideas, images is much, much, much easier and much more widely dispersed. And this isn't mobile. This is a village in India with a computer behind a screen. But it illustrates the idea that information, ideas, opinions are widely available now through, well, this, but also through mobile phones. So again, it's asking us, how do we make our students resilient, critical, intelligent in this kind of world of abundance and confusion? So my talk has moved from a situation where I started talking about research projects inside institutions to daily activities in every part of our cultures and societies. And I've moved from talking about how we could use mobile technology to basically deliver the curriculum, support the professionals in the institutions that already existed, to a world where everyone can be accessing and creating and transforming information and opinions far more widely than ever before, in different ways and starting from different places. But nevertheless, that's the world our students go into. And we've seen the development of MOOCs, and I was involved in one of the first ones before they became what they are now. What they are now seems to be corporate machines with very traditional teaching, but this was an example of one we ran with 600 people, where you could see the technology connecting people to free and open resources and to each other's ideas. So should we be equipping our students to participate in this kind of collaborative learning where everyone has the possibility to teach everyone else? And we've also seen the idea of increasingly of performance support, where the technology enables us to do more and more complex jobs. Okay, so if the technology allows us to do more and more complex jobs, or does more and more complex jobs on our behalf, what is the role of learning? Certainly the role of learning is not to memorize things, because we've got YouTube, the World Wide Web, Wikipedia, but also we've got systems that help us make decisions. So again, what's the role of learning, and what's the role of teachers in that kind of world? Okay, and I'll just finish by saying maybe what I've said has been largely upbeat and not too critical, but we have had some challenges. One of them is that we haven't often achieved scale. We haven't done what we've done big. And one of the ways we now think we're going to solve that is with this idea of bring your own device. And some people have said this amounts to letting the animals run the zoo. That may be true, and I think the idea of bring your own device is a Trojan horse for a lot of interesting conversations about who is in control in the education system and who is it for. I think also that technology, digital technology and mobile technology has the capacity to make bad teaching slightly more interesting, and maybe just has the capacity to industrialize the way that we run our universities and colleges. So there is always the possibility that it just allows us to do bad things better or more efficiently or cheaper. And so whilst we might have conversations about education or educational objectives or educational aspirations, those aren't the conversations we have with our managers, our directors, our policymakers or our ministries necessarily. We've also seen the work of the research community in mobile learning generating new ideas, new concepts. And I think that's quite important, actually, that everyone embraces the idea that theories about how we learn are important, because if we don't, you'll find that other people have their own ideas about learning, and those ideas might be just keep it simple, stupid, or content is king. So we've actually got to discuss and theorize about education as well as just doing it in our professional lives. And obviously, discussions about mobile learning or digital learning don't happen in isolation from other conversations, maybe those about the flipped classroom, which is essentially a conversation about what is the point of being face-to-face with our learners, and what is the point of them being face-to-face with each other, and why do they come onto the school buildings or come into the university campus? What's the role of technology in enhancing that? Finally, I get asked by journalists a lot of the time, is the evidence for mobile learning any good? No, it's not, actually. It's really fluffy. And that used to worry me. But now I think the argument for mobile learning is not that the evidence is weak and we need to try harder to build evidence, but actually, if you look at our societies and you look at the technologies they are using and you look at how often they are using technology, clearly our world is mobile and the education sector needs to catch up, and that's the reason, not the fact that we've got evidence.
Thank you. Paldies. Thank you, Professor.